Module 3, the practice of language assessment. The building quality system for language assessment. When we say that any product or a service is of good quality, we generally mean that it consistently lives up to or is better than what we expect. For many people, a good quality car is safe and comfortable and always starts when we want it to. A good quality hotel has clean, quiet and comfortable rooms and equipment that works well and staff who respond promptly and politely when we have requests. When thinking about buying a new product or using a new service, people often want to find out something about its quality. They may read reviews on website or in magazines or ask their friends about it. Or they may try using it for a short period to find out if they like it. The expectation people have of any service or product will depend partly on their needs. People look for different things in a hotel depending on whether they will stay there alone on a business trip or one night or with their family on vacation for a week. Expectations are also affected by factors such as price. People don't expect 5-star luxury in a cheap hotel and they don't expect a small cheap car to go very fast or to be as smooth and comfortable as a limousine. Similarly, it would be unrealistic to expect teachers working under strict time pressures to produce assessments with the same qualities that are demanded of tests made by large national or international testing agencies. Equally, large testing agencies can't be expected to produce assessments that take into account what an individual teacher has chosen to cover in class over the past few weeks. But what expectations should assess is, on the one hand, or uses of assessment results. On the other, have of different types of assessment. And as producers of assessments, what we can do to ensure that the assessments we make are as good as they can be, that they are of high quality. According to White, 1998, ideas about quality borrowed from business management have become increasingly influential in large education. Two concepts of particular importance to language assessment are standards and quality management. Standards describe desirable characteristics of products and services such as consistency, environmental friendliness, safety, and economy. When products of system works well and safety at an economical cost, it is often because they meet predetermined standard. Quality management is a means of achieving and surpassing standards and involve continuous improvement in the effectiveness and efficiency of an organization and the process it carries out. This module will look at quality standards of language assessments and steps that can be taken to build the principle of continuous improvements into their developed and ongoing use. Module 2 showed that the concept of assessment includes practices that are carried out to meet a very wide variety of different purposes. It is inevitable that high quality should have different meaning for a classroom teacher experimenting with new approaches of formative assessment. A program leader asked to develop achievement tests for use in a college. And a Ministry of Education or testing agency developing a new test for use nationwide. Different uses of language assessment are sometimes seen to be mutually incompatible. Some commentators suggest that large-scale proficiency tests and classroom assessments should each be approached in a different way. The resources available in each setting, the kind of information needed, and the implementation of the decisions that will be made are certainly quite different. On the other hand, assessments of all kinds are about obtaining good quality evidence of accesses, knowledge, skills, or abilities. The principles presented in this module are based on the practical advice offered in a range of language assessment test book and are intended to be relevant across the broad spectrum of language assessment contexts. Projects to develop a new assessment, especially at the classroom or program level, are often seen by those involved as one of linear exercises with clear-cut beginning and end point. It is decided that an assessment is needed. The content is settled on. Producers are sketched out and the questions or items are written, often within a very tight schedule. Or perhaps a test is bought in from a publisher or other external organization. The assessment is administered to a group of learners. Scores are awarded, decisions are taken, and certificates are handed out. The work is complete. Sometimes the assessment is used once and then discarded. The next time everyone starts again from the beginning. Sometimes the same assessment is used again, unchanged, even when it has obvious shortcomings. The first of these choices is an obvious and impractical waste of resources, rather like buying a new car each time you need to travel somewhere. The second is irresponsible and potentially dangerous, like buying a new car, suspecting there is a serious problem with the brakes, but instead of taking it back to the dealer for investigation and repairs, ignoring the problem and continuing to drive around in it. Poor quality assessment practices may not cause physical injuries, but they do produce misleading results and so can have damaging consequences, both for the assessors and for the people who use the result as a basis for decisions. Bauman 2001 argued that in addition to the familiar problems of listed resources and lack of time, many teachers suffer from a lack of assessment literacy. They have not received training in basic assessment principle and do not understand how assessment and teaching can complement each other. Contain 2009 cited a number of shortcomings in teacher-made language assessment that could result from this lack of assessment literacy. Tests made by teachers are often too easy or too difficult for learners, fail to reflect what learners have achieved, and contain content that has not been taught or is not included on the syllabus. Effective assessment comes at a price. Not every institution has the resources to employ the full array of trained language assessment professionals listed by BAC. 2009, including specialist assessment writers, psychometricians or statisticians trained in educational measurement, and graphic designers. Nonetheless, all institutions certainly do have the capacity to improve on their current practice. Fortunately, acknowledging a few basic principles can help to develop assessment literacy and improve the quality of practice. This principle can be assumed by the acronym PRICE. Planning and reflection lead to improvement when supported by cooperation and informed by evidence. Planning should always be built into the development of any new project, and assessments are no exception. The more thorough the plans, the better the assessment is like to be. And reflection and review are fundamental to good quality systems. The effectiveness of plan and current materials and practices in fulfilling their purpose should constantly be questioned and evaluated. Improvements on current materials and practices in always possible and should be the constant aim of any assessment system. Reflection is directed towards making involvements. Cooperation and teamwork are essential to the development of good assessment materials and practices. Shared ideas and shared criticisms aid reflection and inform improvement. Evidence is the basis for good decisions making. Reflection based on good evidence is much more constructive than pro- produ- prejudice guesswork as a means of improving quality. Effective record keeping helps everyone involved to understand where procedures and materials could be made better. Systematic analysis informs effective improvement. Planning, reflection, and improvement. The first three price principles, planning, reflection, and improvement, suggest a regular plan do review schedule in with which current assessments are evaluated and ideas for improvements put forward for integration within the plans for the next time the assessment will be used. These principles do not only apply to locally developed material. Assessments that have worked well in one location with one group of learners may not work equally well in another. Material that is bought in from publisher of external agencies should be subject to the same process of critical reviews as locally developed material. The checklist provided in the next three chapters are intended to help in this process. The last two of the price principles, cooperation and evidence, are the conditions required to make planning, reflection, and improvement effective. Cooperation. One cause of poor assessment practices in a mistaken belief that individual expertise or experience can guarantee quality. An experienced teacher is trusted to produce and carry out assessment in a very way than a novice. Although this doesn't always mean that novice will be given any help with the job. An expert in assessment is assumed to produce better material than a teacher with no specialist training. This may seem reasonable, but even assessment material produced by the most skilled, best trained individuals have fault and idiosyncrasies. Where 1993 stressed the point that developing assessment should be a group activity. Individuals acting alone are very unlikely to be able to plan, design, and put into practice a really effective assessment system. In fact, teamwork of various kinds is essential to good assessment. First, it is important at the planning stage to agree on standards that the team will work towards. If individual teachers or testers each use very different approaches, either in creating assessments or in judging performance, learning can become a disjointed and confusing experience. Davidson and Lynch 2002 argued that good assessment are developed by consensus rather than by imposition. When people combine their efforts and everyone involved has a say in the development of an assessment system, there is much better chance that it will run successfully and that problems will be minimized. If teachers are able to work together to contribute to a shared collection or bank of assessment material, the system can become more efficient as well as more coherent and effective. The following perhaps of this book suggests ways of organizing and coordinating this shared activity. Another aspect of cooperation is linked to reflection. The work of team members should be checked and repeatedly evaluated. A second opinion on assessment materials is always necessary, and having a third or fourth opinions is even better. Someone with a different point of views is often able to spot problems and errors that one writer or one scholar may have missed. Wherever possible, classroom teachers should work with their colleagues in regularly reviewing their overall approach to assessment, the specific techniques and materials they intend to use, and the decision they make when awarding scores. At the program level, enough resources must be made available to allow for regular review of all assessment materials and procedures. It should also be kept in mind that effective reflection and reviews needs a supportive and professional environment in which criticism is objective and is not taken to be personally malicious rather. As one teacher involved in developing assessments said of the experience of teamwork, I learned to be open to and willing to accept group mates. Criticism Willingness to accept sincere criticism is vital to good quality assessment system. Collecting evidence. A very widespread shortcoming in much assessment practice is, paradoxically, that the assessment itself often goes unexamined. It is surprisingly rare for assessment users to attempt in any systematic way to find out whether the decisions taken based on assessment results were the right decisions. Precautions may be taken to guard against obvious disasters. Questions that were all too difficult for the students. Test papers getting lost or stolen. Recording equipment breaking down. But few people or institutions seriously try to answer the important questions of whether the assessment has really provided information that is as comprehensive and useful as it could be, and whether things might be done better next time. Where language learners really place into the most appropriate classes on the basis of a placement test, where insights from self-assessment used effectively to improve learning, following a university entrance test where the best suited people accept into the courses, where new employees hired offer taking a proficiency test really able to carry out their work in the foreign language. Adequate answer to questions like this will only be found in evidence is collected rigorously and systematically. However, in many educational systems, apart from scores or grades, very little information or any kinds is ever collected about assessments. In these circumstances, it is impossible to be confident that an assessment has provided relevant and adequate information about assessees. Evidence is also important at the planning stage, informing the initial design of an assessment. Proficiency assessment should be planned on the basis of evidence about how assessees may need to use the language in the world beyond the test. In assessing achievement, evidence is needed about what learners have been studying. Developers will additionally need data on a wide range of practical issues, such as how long it takes to prepare and score the kinds of tasks envisaged, how many computer workstation can be made available for an assessment, and so on. As another vital source of evidence, every language assessment handbook insists that material must be tried out or trailed in some way, particularly if it is to be used in any high stakes assessment. One that leads to the decisions with serious consequences for the assessee. Without without compromising the security of any confidential test material, assessees who are as similar as possible to those who will take the operational assessment, the one that will be used as a basis of decision making, are given tasks that are under development. The responses to each question are recorded and scored, and the results are analyzed statistically, learn whether the material is really capable of providing experience collected from test taker and those involved in administering the assessment, can also help in identifying problems. Statistical analysis play a particularly important role in the practice of language assessment, particularly in support of formal testing. At least a basic understanding of statistics is needed to understand how tests are made and how results should be interpreted. A short overview of key techniques and their application can be found on the website that accompanies this book. Fuller treatment are to be found in Bachman 2004 and Brown 2005. During the initial development of assessment, the focus is on the types of tasks that will be used. Does this task format work? Do the tasks elicit useful information about the assessees? The term vary, but this trailing process is sometimes called piloting. Piloting rather. One Once the system is in operation, the focus is on fresh material that will go into new form of the assessment. Are these particular questions good examples of the established type? Do they provide the same kind of information as the prototype task? This trailing process is some called pretesting. In addition to the piloting of task types and pretesting of new material, after each administration of an operational assessment, there should always be a process of reflection or item and assessment reviews so that lesson can be learned and improvements made. When intentions are not stated or understood, procedures not consistently followed, and evidence not carefully collected, it is impossible to tell just how good or bad an assessment has been and fulfilling its purpose. Although experience suggests that the quality is likely to be very poor. If nobody explains just what the assessment is supposed to measure, it is impossible to judge whether or not it has been successful in measuring or capturing anything meaningful. If nobody keeps a record of the answers that assessees gave to each question, it becomes possible to tell whether some of the questions are problematic. If nobody provides guidance on which answers can be accepted and which are incorrect, the different people score an assessment, each one may judge the same answer differently. If nobody sets out how much time each assessee should be allowed or what resources of help they can use, some may unfairly be given more time. If nobody sets out how much time each accessee should be allowed or what resources to help they can use, some may unfairly be given more time to receive more help than others. In these circumstances, In the absence of standards for language assessment, the results may be meaningless and so cannot be useful. Practices will certainly need improvement, but without evidence, it will not be clear how they should be improved. The assessment cycle. When improvement is sought, assessment and assessment system should not be seen just a product, such as test papers, as or even such as a role plays or 1 hour written examinations, or even as a series of link evidence that lead to a decision about the assessee. Instead, assessment should be viewed as continuous and repeating cycle of activities. The process does not end when a decision about the assessee is made, but can be modified and improved before the cycle begins again. The next time around, the quality assessment will be better. Within the overall cycle, it is useful to identify a sequence of activities. It's associated with a particular foundation of role. Each role may be carried out by a different person or group of people, and some may even be carried out automatically by machines. On the other hand, one person or group may carry out several roles. In large-scale assessment programs, each activity will involve detailed documentations so that different groups of individuals can coordinate their contributions. Teachers, especially if working more or less independently on classroom assessment, will not be able to keep such extensive records, but will need to consider efficient ways of keeping track of and communicating the progress that their students are making in their learning, how well their approach has worked, and how their assessment fell into an overall school program. Breaking down the cycle into the different stage involved can help them to do this. Figure 3.1 represent that different role involved in an assessment cycle and the various documents used to record each stage. The role and their associated documents are discussed in the paragraphs that follow. Stage 1, designers objectives and specifications. As we saw in module 1, and as in Hughes 2003 insisted, the essential first step in assessment is to make oneself proficiently sorry oneself perfectly clear about what is one wants to know and for what purpose. Fulcher 2010 compared the designer of an assessment to the architected of a house. The architect begins with an understanding on the purpose of the building that he or she is going to design. Considers, among other things, the location and the available budget, and turns this into plans for the construction for the building, of the building rather. The architect provides detailed drawing and institution for the builders. The plan include the material to be used, the, the precise layout of the rooms, and so on. Just as the architect needs to know before beginning the design whether the buildings is intended as a family home or a shopping center. The designer of an assessment need to be clear about the decision or decisions. The assessment is intended to inform. Many assessment projects fail before they begin become too little attention in given to what the people who will use the result to make decisions. The assessments users really need to know about the assessees. Often assessment users really need know about the assessees. Often that the outlets, the users themselves may not be very clear about what kinds of information they really need. This reinforces the need for cooperation. The designers of the assessment will need to consult closely with the users of the use of that they build a shared understanding of the intended purpose. From the outset, as part of the planning process, it is necessary to decide who will be involved in each stage of delivering and administration and to take account to their views in developing the assessment. Architects do not, of course, beginning from nothing. They can draw on centuries of human experience in constructing homes, offices, shops, and factories, and long-standing knowledge of traditional building materials and techniques. In making their plans, they can combine the established tradition with innovations such as newly developed materials and new ideas for design. Similarly, good assessment designers will have an understanding of what they believe language ability or whatever else in being assessed consists of and of how this is relevant to the context in which the assessment will be used. The particular purpose and particular population of assessees they have in mind. They will know how language abilities have been assessed by others in the past or how they are assessed in other contexts. They will also be aware of the effects that the use of the different techniques available may have on those involved. The designers of formative classrooms assessment system need an understanding of how language are learned and how best to use the information from assessment to guide ongoing learning. The issue of what should be assessed and measured by language. The assessment construct has naturally been the center of a great deal of debate between people who favor one approach or another. Part 3 will look at the impact that some of the different theoretical approaches to defining constructs have had on language assessment design. As one means of ensuring a coherent system with consistent results, it is important that the producers followed in making a useful product of carrying out a project can be repeated. The steps in the process have to be recorded rigorously enough to make replication possible. This also helps in identifying the likely source of any problems when they do occur, according to the purpose and formality of the assessment. Different aspects of the content and administration may need to be more or less strictly replicable. Large-scale tests are often standardized, both the content of the test and the conditions for administration are carefully delineated and controlled so that each access will have the same test-taking experience. For reasons of security, the same questions that can't be used every time a test is given. To avoid to avoid this, different forms sets of assessment material that follow exactly the same design but includes different content are produced. These are intended to be similar enough to give comparable results when the assessment is given to different group of people at different times and in different places. Assessees who scored 57% on Form A of a test should also score very close to 57% to Form B. If two forms include very different materials and are administered under different conditions, the results will not be directly comparable. In many kinds of formative assessment, standardization is unnecessary and could be counterproductive as teachers may wish to adjust procedures according to the needs of their students. Nonetheless, some degree of replication is important even for informal classroom questioning and self-assessment. The successful use of formative assessment depends on em- embedding regular producers in the classroom. Teachers and to have a consistent approach to questioning and feedback so that students become familiar with the teaching and understand how the benefits from them. Learners needs to be trained to follow set process if they are going to be effective as and peer assessment. The descriptive reporting of results needs to be carried out consistently so that youth can develop a clear understanding or meaning of their meaning. Specifications. The key documents that communicates standards and guides how an assessment is to be produced, administered and replicated in known as the specifications. The specifications set out the plan for collecting observable evidence that will inform judgment about how much knowledge, skills, or abilities a learner has, connecting theoretical understanding of language with the decision that the users will make about the assessees. Specifications typically include three elements: a design statement, an assessment blueprint, and task specifications. The design statement. When considering the design of a new assessment of an approach to assessment with school curriculum, it is important for those involved to be to begin by considering, discussing, and collectively answering some fundamental questions. The purpose of the assessment: what does need to be taken? Who should take the decision? What effect will this decision have on the assessees and on others? Who will be involved in developing the assessment? In addition to the decision makers and assessees, who else has an interest or stake in the assessment? How will their views be taken into account? Who will take the assessment? Who will be the assessees? If some assessees have special requirements, deaf learners taking a speaking test, partially sighted students taking a test of reading skill, how will this be met? How will any adoptions affect the decision? What aspects of language and which curriculum objective are relevant to the decision? How are these aspects of language believed to connect to the decision? How much information about the assessee's knowledge, skill, or abilities will be needed to support the decision? Is an assessment the only way to obtain relevant information? What other sources might be used? Is another suitable assessment already available? Is an assessment the most effective way to obtain the relevant information? Could other resources be used to supplement the assessment? In classroom assessment, should the focus be on the whole class or on group of students, pairs of students, individuals? Will all students be assessed on the subset? What is the best way to report the result so that they are as helpful as possible to users? What effect is the implementation of the assessment intended to have on teaching and learning? What unintended negative effects might it have, and what will be done to prevent this? Large-scale assessment program will document the answers to questions such as this in the form of what Bachman and Palmer called a design statement, and Fulcher and Davidson called a statement or test purpose. The design statement usually comes at the beginning of the specification and sets out the designer understanding of the purpose of the assessment. The, deci- the decision to be made. Stakeholders affected by the decision and individuals responsible for making the decision. Fulcher and Davidson 2009. It provides a definition to the assessment, construct a description of the assessees, and an explanation of why the approach adopted by the designer is appropriate. Classroom teachers will not need to publish a design statement for each assessment they use in class, but they will nonetheless need to have a clear understanding of the theoretical justification for the content. What theories of language and proficiency under, underpin the test, and why the test is the way it is. And this is true for other forms of assessments as it is for tests. Within teaching programs, an explicit statement of the overall approach to assessment and its relationship to learning should be included among the key curriculum documents. Blueprints. Just as builders need detailed plans or blueprint in order to construct a building, so those involved in preparing an assessment need more than a design statement if they are going to produce materials that matches what the designer intended. Assessment blueprints include clear statements about what content to be covered, what methods are to be used, how many papers or sections where there are, how long the test takes, and so on.